Chapter 34, Media Scandal. The world did not end with a bang. It ended with the smell of wet soot and the rhythmic, mocking pulse of blue and red lights reflecting off the Swiss snow. I was still on my knees. The charred, twisted band of platinum, the ring I had placed on Maya's finger as a promise of a new life, felt like a brand in the center of my palm. I stared at the Herslinden Clinic, or what was left of it. The top floors were a hollowed-out ribcage of glowing orange embers, coughing thick, black smoke into the pristine alpine sky. "Sir, you have to move," Marcus whispered, his hand trembling on my shoulder. "The police are setting a perimeter. The press. God, the press are already at the gates." I didn't move. I couldn't. My lungs were filled with the ash of the only thing that made me human. She was in there, Marcus. She told me she was waiting. She was standing in the lab. "We don't know that she didn't get out," Marcus said, his voice cracking with a lie we both knew. "The evacuation was chaotic. There are survivors in the lower triage." I looked at the ring again. Platinum doesn't just fall off a finger. It doesn't end up in the rubble unless the hand it was on is no longer capable of holding it. A sudden, sharp glare of white light hit my face. I blinked, blinded. Then another. And another. The drones had arrived. High above the burning clinic, a swarm of media drones hovered like vultures, their cameras zoomed in on the man kneeling in the snow. They weren't filming the tragedy of the patients. They were filming the collapse of Alexander Blackwood. Within seconds, the silence of my grief was shattered by a wall of noise. The press had breached the outer gates. Dozens of reporters, flanked by camera crews, were sprinting up the hill toward the smoking ruins. "Mr. Blackwood, was this a coordinated strike against the Sterling Trust?" "Alexander, did you know about the security breach before you left for New York? Is it true Maya Sterling was inside the blast zone?" One reporter, a woman from a major European network, shoved her way past a frantic nurse and thrust a microphone toward my face. "Mr. Blackwood, the life-term clause you signed yesterday with your mother, did it include a contingency for Miss Sterling's death? Is this the settlement the world was waiting for?" The word death hit me like a physical strike. The rage, cold and lethal, finally surged through the paralysis. I stood up. I didn't look like a grieving man. I looked like the titan who had built an empire on the bones of his enemies. I turned to the reporter, my eyes so dark and predatory that she actually recoiled, the microphone shaking in her hand. "Get that camera out of my face," I said, my voice a low, terrifying growl that carried over the roar of the fire. "The public has a right to know, Alexander." Someone else shouted from the crowd. "Did you kill her to get your company back?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I walked toward them, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. I wasn't running from them. I was walking through them, a ghost in a charcoal suit. Marcus was on his phone, his face pale as he read the headlines that were already saturating the internet. He showed me the screen of his tablet. "The Blackwood bloodbath. Clinic explodes HOURS after settlement. Maya Sterling believed dead in Zurich blast. The billionaire's final reclamation. Did Alexander Blackwood finish what he started?" The narrative was already set. In the eyes of the world, I wasn't the man who had surrendered everything to save her. I was the monster who had realized he couldn't own her, so he decided to destroy her. The media scandal wasn't a side effect of the tragedy. It was the weapon being used to ensure that even if I survived the fire, I wouldn't survive the fallout. "Marcus," I said, my voice returning to that mechanical, lethal vibration. "Call the private security team, not the Blackwood detail, my personal ghosts. I want a 5-mile radius around this clinic locked down. No one leaves. And I want the footage from the parking garage. Sir, the police have the servers. I don't care what the police have. Buy the servers, buy the police. Find out who left that building before the explosion. I looked back at the fire. The vigil of justice had been tipped. The scales were gone. Julian Vane didn't just burn a building, I whispered to the ash-filled wind. He tried to burn my soul. Now I'm going to show him exactly how much heat a Blackwood can generate before he turns to dust. Maya POV. Darkness is not a void, it is a weight. It pressed against my eyelids, thick and smelling of ozone and old copper. My head throbbed with a rhythmic, agonizing pulse. Every time I tried to draw a breath, my chest felt like it was being squeezed by iron bands. I tried to move my hand. It felt heavy, like it was made of lead. My fingers brushed something cold and gritty. Concrete. I opened my eyes. The world was a blur of gray smoke and flickering red light. I was lying on a cold floor. Above me, the ceiling was gone, replaced by a jagged hole that looked out into a void of black smoke. The explosion. Memory rushed back in a sickening wave. The man in the black suit, the message from Vane, the floor erupting beneath me. I tried to sit up, but a hand slammed onto my shoulder, pinning me back down. Careful, Maya. You've got a nasty concussion. You wouldn't want to miss the show. I knew that voice. It was the soundtrack to my nightmares. I turned my head, the movement sending a spike of white-hot pain through my skull. Caleb Thorne was sitting on a crate a few feet away. He wasn't wearing his waiter's jacket or his consultant's suit. He was wearing tactical gear, a headset around his neck, and a look of pure, manic triumph on his face. "Caleb," I rasped, my voice sounding like broken glass. You blew it up. The patients, my father." "The patients are a statistic, Maya, and your father. Well, let's just say he's currently the most valuable ghost in Switzerland." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with a terrifying intensity. "Do you have any idea what they're saying out there? The whole world thinks Alexander Blackwood finally snapped. They think he murdered the Sterling girl to protect his inheritance." He held up a tablet, showing me a live news feed. I saw the footage of the clinic. I saw the fire. And then I saw Alexander. He was kneeling in the snow. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked broken. I saw him pick something up my ring and press it to his palm. "Alexander," I whispered, a tear carving a path through the soot on my cheek. "He's a murderer in the eyes of the public now, Maya," Caleb said, a cruel laugh escaping him. "The media scandal is so thick he won't be able to hire a lawyer, let alone run a company. Julian and we didn't just take the code. We took his name. We took his future. And we took you. Why didn't you just kill me? Because you're the key, remember, the fourth factor. The code in your head is the only thing that makes the mapping work. And now that the world thinks you're dead, you belong to us. No more Blackwoods, no more locked-in contracts, just you and the work. Forever." He stood up and walked toward me. He reached down and grabbed my hair, forcing me to look at the screen again. "Look at him, Maya. Look at your savior." On the screen, Alexander was standing up. He was walking toward the reporters, his face a mask of such cold, absolute rage that the feed momentarily cut out as the cameraman flinched. "He thinks you're Ash," Caleb whispered into my ear. "And by the time he finds out you're not, he'll be sitting in a prison cell for your murder." I closed my eyes. The fallout wasn't a corporate battle, it was a grave. But as the darkness began to take me again, I felt a spark of the old defiance, the Sterling fire flicker in my chest. Caleb Thorne thought he had won because he had the detonator. He forgot one thing: I was the one who wrote the code, and I knew how to find the backdoors in any prison. Alexander POV. The Zurich police headquarters was a building of stone and silence. I sat in an interrogation room that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Across from me sat two inspectors, one Swiss, one from Interpol. They hadn't asked me about the explosion. They had asked me about the contract. "Mr. Blackwood," the Interpol agent said, tapping a copy of the life-term clause on the table. "You signed this document at 4:00 p.m. yesterday. In it, you agreed to an annulment of your marriage to Maya Sterling." "Correct." "I signed it to get the medical keys to save her life," I said, my voice flat. "And yet, 3 hours later, the clinic where she was staying, the clinic that held the evidence of your family's crimes, exploded, with her inside. I was on a plane back to Zurich to stop the settlement. I told her I wasn't accepting the annulment. Do you have a record of that conversation?" I froze. The link was private, encrypted. "How convenient." The Swiss inspector leaned forward. "The media is reporting that your mother, Eleanor Blackwood, has provided a statement. She claims you were unstable, and that you threatened to destroy everything before you let the Sterling Trust take the company." My mother, even from a cell, she was finishing the job. She was feeding the media scandal, turning my desperation into a motive for murder. "I didn't kill her," I said, leaning over the table until I was inches from the agent's face. "And if you spend another 10 minutes questioning me instead of hunting for Julian Vane and Caleb Thorne, you're going to be the ones responsible for what happens next." "Are you threatening us, Mr. Blackwood?" "I'm promising you, I have resources you can't imagine. I have data you haven't even dreamed of. If you don't release me in 5 minutes, I will crash the Swiss stock exchange from this very chair." The door to the room opened. A man in a high-end suit, the American ambassador, walked in, followed by a team of lawyers I didn't recognize. "Release him," the ambassador said, his voice clipped. "Sir, he's a prime suspect in a mass casualty event. He's a private citizen of the United States with diplomatic immunity through the Blackwood Foundation's International Board," the ambassador lied, or perhaps he had just been paid enough to make it true. "And more importantly, the White House is currently on the phone with the Swiss president. There is a security issue here that goes beyond a local fire." I stood up. I didn't wait for the inspectors to agree. I walked out of the room, my lawyers forming a wall around me. Marcus was waiting in the hallway. He looked like he had been through a meat grinder. "Did you find them?" I asked. "The parking garage footage was wiped," Marcus said, falling into step beside me. "But we found a satellite ping. A high-bandwidth data transfer occurred 10 minutes after the blast, from a warehouse in the industrial district near the lake." "Evane." "Maybe, but sir, the scandal is getting worse. The board in New York has officially declared you legally incapacitated. They've appointed a receiver. They're liquidating the Sterling Trust as we speak to pay for the damages of the explosion." I stopped at the entrance to the building. A wall of cameras was waiting for me, hundreds of them. The media scandal had reached its peak. They wanted to see the villain fall. I looked at Marcus. "Give me your phone." "Sir." "Give it to me." I took the phone and opened a live streaming app that broadcast directly to every major financial news network. I didn't hide from the cameras. I walked straight into the center of the swarm. "My name is Alexander Blackwood," I said, my voice projected through the speakers of 1,000 devices. "And the world thinks I am a murderer. They think I destroyed the woman I love to save a company I've already given away. I held up the charred engagement ring for the world to see. Julian Vane, Caleb Thorne, you think you've won because you've turned the world into a judge. You think you've hidden the truth in the smoke. I leaned into the closest camera, my eyes burning with a lethal, absolute focus. I am coming for you, not with a lawyer. Not with a contract. I am coming for you with everything I am. And by the time the sun sets tonight, the world won't be talking about a scandal. They'll be talking about a reckoning. I dropped the phone and walked toward the waiting black SUV. The media was a roar of questions, but I didn't hear them. I only heard the sound of Maya's voice in my head. The fire never dies. She was right, and I was about to become the inferno. Maya POV. The warehouse was a cavern of rusted metal and the smell of stale lake water. Caleb had me zip-tied to a chair in the center of a small, glass-walled office. Outside, I could see men moving crates, black cases with the Vane Global logo. They were packing up. They were leaving. "The transfer is 80% complete, Caleb," one of the men shouted. Good. "Once the code is on the cloud, we burn the servers and the girl." I looked at the server rack across the room. The blue lights were blinking rapidly, a digital pulse of the science that had ruined my life. "Caleb," I said, my voice steadier now, "the mapping isn't finished. You have the factor 4 bridge, but you don't have the synchronization key." Caleb stopped and looked at me, a smirk on his face. "Nice try, Maya. I saw the logs. Alexander sent you the synchronization files before he left." "He sent the drafts. The final key is biometric. It requires a live neural scan to activate the primary relay. If you try to launch without me, the system will crash, and your billion-dollar asset will be a brick." Caleb walked over to me, his eyes narrowing. He grabbed my jaw, his thumb digging into the bruise from earlier. "You're lying. You're just trying to buy time for a dead man." "Check the encryption header, Caleb. It's a 1024-bit biometric lock. I set it up in the Hamptons. Alexander didn't even have the code." He let go of me and lunged for the terminal. He typed frantically for a minute, then let out a string of curses. "She's right," he hissed to the man outside. "The relay is locked. We need a live scan." "Then do it," the man shouted. "We don't have time. Blackwood's ghosts are hitting the perimeter." Caleb turned back to me, a predatory look in his eyes. "You want to be a partner, Maya? Fine, let's map your brain. But I should warn you. Without the stabilization protocols, this is going to hurt." He grabbed a set of neural electrodes from a case and began to attach them to my temples. "The world thinks you're dead, Maya," he whispered. "By the time we're done here, you'll wish they were right." I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I watched the screen. I knew the synchronization key wasn't biometric. That was a lie. The key was a fail-safe I had built into the code weeks ago, a dead man's switch. If the system detected a forced entry without a Blackwood clearance, it didn't just lock. It broadcasted a high-frequency GPS signal to every emergency band in the hemisphere. I looked at the media scandal feed on the secondary monitor. Alexander was on the screen, standing in front of the police station. He was holding my ring. "I'm right here, Alexander," I thought, closing my eyes as the first jolt of the neural scan hit my brain. Find the signal. Find the fire. Alexander POV. The SUV was a high-speed command center. "I have it." Marcus shouted from the passenger seat. "An emergency beacon, 144, 5 megahertz. It's the Sterling signature." "Where?" I roared, slamming the car into a hard turn that sent us skidding across the rain-slicked pavement. The old shipyard, Warehouse 14, it's 3 minutes away. I hit the radio. All teams converge on Warehouse 14. Lethal force authorized for anyone holding a weapon. The target is Miss Sterling. If she has so much as a scratch on her, I will hold you personally responsible. We screamed into the industrial district. I could see the warehouse in the distance, a dark, looming shadow on the edge of the lake. There were no lights, no signs of life, but my heart was thudding a rhythm I recognized. It was the rhythm of a man who was about to reclaim his world. I jumped from the car before it had even stopped. I didn't have a tactical vest. I didn't have a headset. I had a 9mm handgun and the cold, absolute certainty that I was going to kill Caleb Thorne. The front doors were barred from the inside. I didn't wait for the breaching team. I drove the SUV straight through the loading bay door, the glass shattering and the metal groaning as we burst into the warehouse. The room erupted into chaos. Vane's mercenaries opened fire. My security team returned it. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of a war zone. I dove out of the SUV, keeping low. I saw the glass-walled office at the far end of the floor. I saw Maya. She was strapped to a chair, her head surrounded by glowing wires. Caleb Thorne was standing over her, his hand on a lever. He looked like a madman, a relic of a past that was finally, truly dying. "Alexander, stay back." Caleb shouted, his voice amplified by the warehouse acoustics. "One move and I fry her brain." I stopped. My security team stopped. The mercenaries, seeing the stalemate, lowered their weapons. I stepped into the light, my hands open, the gun tucked into my waistband. I looked at Maya. Her eyes were open, filled with a raw, agonizing pain, but she was looking at me. She was alive. "Let her go, Caleb," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "The media scandal is over. The police are on their way. You have nowhere to go." "I have the code," Caleb cried. "I have the future. I don't need a room to own, Alexander. I have the world." "You have a pile of scrap metal and a woman who hates you," I said, taking a slow step forward. "Look at her, Caleb. She's not an asset. She's not a prisoner. She's the woman who just tricked you into broadcasting your location to every police station in Europe." Caleb froze. He looked at the terminal, then back at Maya. "You," he whispered. "The synchronize key," Maya rasped, a weak smile touching her lips. "It was a tracking beacon, you idiot." Caleb let out a roar of rage and lunged for her, his hand reaching for a knife. I didn't calculate. I moved with a speed that defied logic. I was across the room in a blur, my body hitting Caleb's with the force of a tidal wave. We crashed through the glass wall of the office, shards of crystal raining down on us. I was on top of him, my hands around his throat. I didn't see a man. I saw the 30 years of lies. I saw the fire at the clinic. I saw the tears in Maya's eyes. I began to squeeze. "Alexander, stop." The voice was weak, but it was the only sound in the world that could reach me. I looked up. Maya had managed to pull the electrodes from her head. She was leaning against the chair, her eyes wide with horror. "Don't do it," she whispered. "Don't be the man they think you are. Be the man I love." I looked at Caleb. He was gasping for air, his face turning purple, his eyes filled with a pathetic, crawling fear. He wasn't a titan. He wasn't a rival. He was just a small, broken man. I let go of him. I stood up, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. I walked to Maya and knelt beside her. I pulled a pocket knife from my belt and sliced through the zip ties. She fell into my arms, her body shaking with a violent, rhythmic sob. "I've got you," I whispered, burying my face in her hair. "I've got you, Maya. It's over." Maya POV. The sound of sirens filled the warehouse. The police swarmed the building, led by the same inspectors who had questioned Alexander an hour ago. They found the code. They found the mercenaries. They found Caleb Thorne weeping on the floor, but all I could see was Alexander. He was holding me like I was the most precious thing in the world. He was covered in soot, his suit was ruined, and his hands were bleeding from the shattered glass. But his eyes were clear. The media scandal was still raging outside. The world was still talking about the fire, the theft, and the billionaire's fall. But as Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out the charred platinum ring, I realized that the world didn't matter. "I think this belongs to you," he whispered, his voice trembling. I looked at the ring. It was ruined, the diamond was missing, the metal was blackened. It was a piece of wreckage. "It's perfect," I said, holding out my hand. He slid the ruined ring onto my finger. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We walked out of the warehouse together. The sun was rising over Lake Zurich, a brilliant, cold gold. The press was there, a wall of cameras and shouting voices. Alexander didn't hide me. He didn't usher me into the car. He stopped on the front steps, his arm wrapped around my waist, his head held high. "Mr. Blackwood, is she alive?" "Miss Sterling, what happened? Is the locked-in contract over?" Alexander looked at the cameras, and for the first time I saw him truly smile in public. "The contract is over," he said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "But the partnership is just beginning, and if you want to know about the scandal, talk to the man in the handcuffs. I'm going home with the woman who owns the room." He led me to the car. As we pulled away, I looked back at the warehouse. The fallout was over. The fire was out. And as I leaned my head on Alexander's shoulder, I realized that we weren't locked in anymore. We were finally, truly free. Alexander POV, end of chapter 34. The ride back to the hotel was silent. I sat in the back of the car with Maya, her hand in mine. I looked at the ruined ring on her finger, then at the city skyline. The scandal would continue for weeks. The trials would last for years. My mother would never forgive me. The board would never trust me. I had lost my empire. I had lost my reputation. I had lost my history. And as I leaned down to kiss Maya, I realized that I had finally won the only deal that mattered. I was just a man. And she was just a woman. And in the world of Alexander Blackwood, that was the most powerful thing of all. Next chapter, chapter 35, he chooses control over her.